Okay, I think we are live now. Hello, welcome. I'm Tufan Kıymas from Bilkent University Department of Philosophy, and today Peter Singer is with us. Peter Singer is the Ira de Camp Professor of Bioethics at Princeton University. He first became well-known internationally after the publication of Animal Liberation in 1975. His other books include Practical Ethics, Rethinking Life and Death, One World Now, The Most Good You Can Do, and The Life You Can Save. The Animal Liberation and Practical Ethics, they were translated into Turkish, and The Life You Can Save, the Turkish translation of The Life You Can Save will be out in May this month. He was the founding president of the International Association of Bioethics, and with Paula Cavalieri of the Great Ape Project. In 2005, Time magazine named Peter Singer one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Following the publication of the first edition of The Life You Can Save, Professor Singer founded the organization bearing the same name to help alleviate suffering and poverty in low-income countries. By recommending highly effective charities at thelifeyoucansave.org, the organization aims to make it easy for people to do the most good with their donations. Thank you very much, Professor Singer, for joining me today.
I'm very happy to be with you and with the audience, of course.
Thank you. And now today we will be talking about your book, The Life You Can Save, mostly, and Effective Altruism. Again, it will be out, the Turkish translation will be out if everything goes according to plan this month, and it will be available on thelifeyoucansave.org, and we will announce it in our departmental website and also social media accounts of Bilkent Philosophy. And this was done, the Turkish translation was done by a team of volunteers, actually, including Bilkent University students and recent graduates and members of Effective Altruism Turkey. And also, I would like to thank you for the preface that you have written for the Turkish translation. All right, so let's start with the most basic question then. Your book, The Life You Can Save, what's the main thesis of the book? What's the main message that you want to convey with this book?
The central message that I would like to get across is that for people who are living in more or less comfortably off in a wide range of countries, that would include Australia, where I'm speaking to you from now, and the United States, where I teach, and but it would also include Turkey. People who have more than they need to meet their basic needs, then it's possible to do an immense amount of good with relatively modest amounts of contributions of money, provided you give them to the most effective charities. So in a sense, the message is you can do a lot of good very easily, but you need to know where to give that. And then, having said that, I want to say, and since you can do a lot of good so easily, this is a good thing to do. This is something that we should think of as part of living an ethical life. We shouldn't just ignore people in other countries who are on very low incomes, who are in extreme poverty. Mm-hmm. We should recognize that to live a good life, to act ethically, is to take account of the differences between us and the fact that we can therefore relatively easily help people in need.
Mm-hmm. So then is this idea what is called effective altruism?
Well, this idea is one part of effective altruism. It is an application of effective altruism in terms of saying we ought to, at least one of our major aims ought to be to do good for others. Mm-hmm. And that's the altruistic part. Mm-hmm. And the effective part is to say, but you must think about how you can do that most effectively, how you can do the most good. It's not enough just to say, well, I'm sure giving to this charity will do some good. Mm-hmm. Because if you could have done 10 times as much good, or perhaps 100 times as much good by giving to a different charity, obviously you're wasting the majority of your donation. Mm-hmm. And those figures of 10 or 100 times are not unrealistic. comparing just a sort of randomly selected charity to one that is really been independently checked and researched and found to be one of the very best.
So living an effective altruistic life, would that require people to change their lives drastically? So what's the necessary thing to do?
So there are degrees, if you like, that you can make effective altruism your dominant, overriding purpose in life. And if you do that, then it will change your life very drastically, I think, because you will think about how you can do the most good at all times, and that might involve giving away a large part of your income. It might even involve changing your career so that you can earn more money, so that you can have more to give away. I've talked to several people in the effective altruist movement, and I had one student at Princeton who originally was thinking about going to graduate school to study philosophy and becoming a professor. But when he thought as an effective altruism, would being a philosophy professor do the most good? He decided no, it wouldn't. Because one of the alternatives he had open to him, because of the particular skills that he had, was to go into Wall Street, the finance industry, and earn a lot of money, and then give away a lot of money. And that's in fact what he's been doing for the last several years. He's been earning, a lot more than he would ever earn as a professor, and he's been giving away at least half of that to effective charities. So that's one way in which effective altruism can change your life. There are others. I know people who've donated a kidney to a stranger because there are people on waiting lists for kidney who have very poor quality of life. Some of them are likely to die. But if they can get a donor kidney, their lives can return more or less to normal. And the risk of donating a kidney is not very great, quite small, really. Maybe 1 in 3,000 that you will die because you only have one kidney rather than two. So that's something that, again, that people who are really very serious about effective altruism will do. And I might also mention some people may change their diet, along the lines that I argued in Animal Liberation, because they don't want to be responsible for suffering of animals either. So that's another form of effective altruism, to think about how you can reduce the suffering of non-human animals. So there are a lot of changes it can make, but many people in the effective altruism movement, are not changing their life quite as drastically as the people I mentioned. They're doing something. Let's say they're giving away 10% of their income. That's quite a lot, but for most people, it's not going to mean a dramatic change in the way they live.
So just to be clear, then, most people in the effective altruism movement have 2 kidneys, then, right? So
yes.
that's okay. All right.
Definitely, the number of people I know who have given away a kidney. There are some, but you could count them on the fingers of my hands, and I know lots of people in the movement.
Okay. So you are a utilitarian philosopher, right? So utilitarianism is a consequentialist moral view, which says the morality of an action is determined by its consequences and only by its consequences. But there are some objections to consequentialism or utilitarianism, and there are different views like Kantianism or religious ethics, different religious ethics. Does a person or should one be a utilitarian in order to be an effective altruist? What's the relation there? Is there a relation there?
I don't think the relation runs that you need to be a utilitarian to be an effective altruist. I think it does run in the other direction. If you are a utilitarian, you need to be an effective altruist. Otherwise, you wouldn't be bringing about the best consequences you can. But an easy way to see that you don't have to be a utilitarian to be an effective altruist is to imagine a person who just has one rule that they will never break, no matter what the consequences. Let's say that rule is, I will never kill an innocent human being, no matter how good the consequence of that would be, right? So you're not a utilitarian if you hold that, because utilitarians say you should always do what will have the best consequence. But now, think about your life. How often has it happened that you could have brought about better consequences by killing an innocent human being?
Yeah.
I'm prepared to guess that the answer is never, and I can't think of an instance in my life either.
Mhm.
So given that, I could have acted just as I have as a effective altruist, while still holding this moral rule and therefore not being a utilitarian. And now, then you can add in a few other rules, right? You say, well, most people who are not consequentialists, they don't just have one rule, but they might have a lot of rules. They might say, I'll never torture somebody, or I'll never steal. Maybe some people would even say, I'll never tell a lie, although that's much more difficult. Still, whatever's left when they don't have to breach any of those rules, in the rest of their lives, they can still be thinking about how to do the most good as effectively as possible. So they can still be an effective altruist.
Yeah. All right. So their motivations can come from different, background, philosophical or religious, for example, views. But it is more about the what you are doing and how you are doing that, how you are helping other people, how effectively, or how much you care about the methods that you are using, right?
Exactly, yeah. And in fact, most religious ethics do have something about charity, right? I know that Islam does. You have to give away a percentage of your wealth. Christianity, in many forms, recommends tithing. Judaism also. And yet, very often, the people who practice these religions, they don't actually think about, am I giving this as effectively as possible? So the effective altruist would say, yes, follow what your religious teachings in terms of charity, but also think about how can I do the most good with that?
Yeah. Okay. And so in your book, when you say we should help other people, right, as much as we could and in a most effective way, you are not only saying that it is a good thing to help other people, you are also saying that if we are not helping them, we are doing something wrong. Right? And if we are in a position to help others, right? If we are not ourselves starving, for example, right? We are not in extreme poverty, then if it is possible for us to help other people without sacrificing something as comparably important, then you say it is wrong not to help. So this is the view, right? So it is not supererogatory. It is not like if you help other people, it is good, but if you don't help, that's fine, that's your choice. But you are saying it would be wrong not to help. And this is somewhat ambitious to, some people.
Well, I think this is an implication of a consequentialist or utilitarian ethic, that, yes, there is something wrong about it. But I think we can say something that makes this seem less black and white than it is. And, this terminology of right and wrong is very black and white. And one way to make it less black and white is to think about praise and blame, right? So usually when somebody does something wrong, we blame them for doing something wrong. And when they do what's right, we praise them. But utilitarians sometimes say that the distinction between right and wrong is not the same as the distinction between who should I praise and who should I blame. Because praising and blaming are also acts, and therefore we should judge them by their consequences. Now, suppose that somebody is living in a community where hardly anybody gives anything significant to charity, right? People give nothing, or they give a few coins, when somebody puts a tin under their nose, that's all. And then somebody comes along who's quite comfortably off, let's say even a bit more than comfortably off, and they start giving 10% of their income to effective charities. Now, maybe they could give 20% and they would still not have sacrificed anything comparable to the amount of good that they're doing. But should I blame this person who's giving only 10% because he's not giving 20%, which he could give? Well, I think as a utilitarian, that would be counterproductive. It's much better that I try to encourage more people in this community to give 10%. And then, therefore, more will be donated. So I'm going to praise this person, even though there's a sense in which what he's doing is wrong, because he's not giving, as much as, sacrificing something of comparable importance. But still, I want more people in the community to act like him. And so I praise him for standing out from the community and giving much more than others. And I don't blame him for the fact that he could still give more.
Mm-hmm. All right. So, and also this means that not forcing people to give, right? It's still their decision. It's still their free decision, and we are encouraging them, but we are not taking, because it is the right thing to do. So I will force the person to do the right thing. So it is not right for me to take or me being the government, maybe, right? Taking from the person and giving to the poor. It's more about the individual choice, right?
Yes, generally speaking, though I do support governments giving some foreign aid, which has to be paid for through tax revenues.
Yeah.
So it's not that I'm opposed, to. Generally speaking, the world's governments give rather little. The best of the nations give about 1% of their gross national product, and many other nations give much less. The United States gives, I think, less than 1/4 of 1%. I think that that's good, and I would like, in fact, all of the nations to give at least 1%. They could probably give more. So there would be a little coming out of tax revenue, but not to the level that I think we ought to be doing. And I think we ought to, in a way, governments can't get too far ahead of public opinion. Otherwise, at least in democratic societies, they're not going to get re-elected. So I think that we have to try to educate people to want to give more themselves, and perhaps then they'll see if their government is giving, and the government is giving effectively too, then they'll be happy for some of their taxes to go for that.
Okay. So in your, both in the book and also in earlier your articles, you gave an example of a drowning child. And also you give an example, you show a short video clip in your TED Talk at the beginning of so this is the Chinese girl hit by a truck, and people are just, walking around, seeing the child suffering that they see, and they just walk around and don't help, not even call, right? To call for help. So now at the beginning of your talk, you say, how many of you would help this kid? And many of the audience members, they raise their hand. And then you say, but what morally significant difference would it make? Whether the child is just near you, just you can see, or you cannot see, far away. That doesn't make a moral difference. And then you say, you should do the same thing now then, because children are dying because of preventable reasons. However, not everyone in the audience raised their hands, right? When you said, would you help this kid? Most of them, yes, but not all of them. Do you have anything to say to those people who wouldn't raise their hand, who wouldn't say, that is not my fault, I didn't hit the girl, so I have no responsibility to help, or a drowning child, I like my shoes, I don't want my shoes to get wet, so I didn't, throw that kid into the pond. So do you have anything to say to those people who just don't care? Should they care?
Yes, I think they should care, but that question gets you more deeply into the nature and basis of morality, because some people think that morality is just subjective and everybody has their own views, and you can't really argue. If somebody doesn't care about one thing and you care about that, you can't really produce any arguments. I disagree. I think that there is a rational basis for ethics. I think that basis comes from some things that are self-evident. I think, for example, it's self-evident that serious pain and suffering is a bad thing, which is not to say that, it may ultimately have good consequences, I suppose, sometimes, but pain and suffering just considered in itself is a bad thing. And if it is, and you can easily relieve it, then I think it is, you have a reason for relieving it. And I think that's a reason which ultimately any rational being ought to be able to see. Now, having a reason for something is not the same as caring. You might not have the emotions that make you sympathize with the child or with the child's parents and think, that's a terrible thing that's happening. But I think you should be able to see that, if I were in pain and suffering and somebody could easily relieve my pain and suffering, I would want them to do that. I would resent it if they didn't do it. And, if I then think about that in my own situation, I can see that, well, I ought to really help this other person, that there's nothing unique about me that means that it's okay for me to ignore the needs of others, but not okay for others to ignore my pain and suffering. So I think there are arguments that can be used, but nevertheless, I'm not saying that everybody will be convinced, because we're not perfectly rational beings. I think humans are a complex mixture of emotions and feelings with the capacity to reason. But the capacity to reason is not always sufficiently powerful to override various feelings, including, of course, self-interest, like, I like my shoes and I don't want to spoil my shoes, and I don't want to be up for the expense of buying new ones.
All right. And some people say, yes, pain and suffering is bad, and people are suffering. Something must be done. But something must be done by their governments, or something must be done by for example, if the poverty there, or famine or something like that, if it is caused partially or wholly by policies of global companies or governments or things like that, where it's their fault, so they should do something. Something should be done, yes, but not by me, because it's not my fault, right? So some people say something like that. Why should I do something for that? Yes, something must be done, but why should I do something?
Well, in the end, I suppose the answer to that is because either the governments or the international corporations are not doing what they could and arguably should do. Certainly, if we're talking about the government of the country, I mean, there are some countries, of course, in which there are people in extreme poverty, but there are other people who are extremely wealthy. And those people who are wealthy maybe are part of the government, or in some cases, they have more or less corruptly appropriated a lot of the wealth of the country for themselves. In other cases, they might have just be close allies of the government. If they should be doing, clearly they should be helping people in extreme poverty. It's wrong that they don't. But if they don't, and if you don't have the ability to change their behavior, then there's still the question. So does that just mean that the completely innocent people in extreme poverty in that country are going to suffer and die because the government is doing the wrong thing? I would still say, if you can help, you should. So I think it's if you can get the government to change its policy, of course, or if you can get the international corporations to change their policy, that's a good thing to do. And an effective altruist might do that. So suppose that, for example, the poverty is caused by the fact that a big international mining company has gone into this area. It's built a big mine. It's got a lot of wealth out of the mine, but it's also polluted the rivers with residues from the mining, and the people can no longer use the water, and so they're much worse off. Now, if that's an international mining company, let's say, and it has its headquarters in the United States, maybe we can put some pressure on that company. Maybe we can have campaigns against it. We can boycott some of its products, or we can get people other companies not to buy from it, or perhaps even we can get the government involved to do something to change its behavior. If there's a chance of that succeeding, then an effective altruist might say, rather than give directly to the poor people, I'm going to give to the campaign that is trying to change the company's behavior. Because although there can be no certainty that that campaign will succeed, if it does succeed, it will help far more people than I could possibly help. So an effective altruist will try to make those calculations. What are the chances of success? How many more people will success help? As against maybe the very high probability that by giving to an aid organization working in that country, I can help 1, 2, 10 people, against the small chance that by joining a campaign with others, I can help I can help 1 million people. Those are the kinds of questions that effective altruists should ask themselves.
Yeah, and also there's that criticism of effective altruism, right? It's like a Band-Aid, sometimes people say, just donating money to charities, but you are saying it is not only about feeding the poor, right? It is also about, systematic change, if it is effective, right? Donating to campaigns and things like that. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. I think people get the impression that effective altruism is only treating the symptoms, the Band-Aid argument, because that's where it's easiest to predict how effective a charity is. Okay, if a charity is, for example, distributing bed nets to protect children against malaria, which is a common cause of death in children in some parts of the world, they can do that in village after village after village. We can see how the child mortality drops in the villages that have bed nets as compared to the villages that don't have bed nets. We can count the number of children who would have died but didn't because of the bed nets, and we know the cost of distributing the bed nets. So we can roughly work out that it costs, let's say, $3,000 to save a child's life. But if somebody says, well, suppose we try to campaign to get the government to take more care of its poorer people, and let's say it is one of these governments that would have the resources, if only the resources would be focused on people in extreme poverty. But it's very hard to work out how likely that campaign is to succeed. Each country is different. Each country has a different constitution, different nature, more resistance or less resistance to outside pressure. And the same if we're trying to change corporate behavior. So that's why effective altruists often draw on research which shows how much good you can do in these more Band-Aid-like remedies. But it certainly doesn't exclude the possibility that you might think bringing about systematic change is worth trying, is something that's worth doing.
No. Do you think it's a problem, though, for effective altruism? So one question was, by the way, I gathered questions from my students and also from other people through social media for you. And one question there was related to this: how can you determine the relative importance when it comes to the project which has a great urgency, for example, vaccine campaigns, or a project which has a very long-term and indirect effect, like education campaigns? So do you think not being able to measure some of the effectiveness of some of the methods, do you think that's a problem, or we can just go ahead and also donate to those kind of causes or those kind of methods too?
I think we can, but obviously it's more speculative if we donate where we don't have the clear evidence. And even with education, it's important to look at studies of what works and what doesn't work. And there's been quite a lot of studies of what leads children to complete school in countries where many people leave school at an early age. So what kinds of changes lead people to complete their schooling? What kind of changes improve their performance so that they can read and write at a certain level, so that they can get office jobs, for example? And we should have evidence about that. We shouldn't just say, here's a charity that is working to educate children. That sounds like a good thing, but what exactly is it doing to educate children? Is it using methods where there is some evidence that this will improve retention of children at school and their levels of literacy and so on? So those ideas about effectiveness are still important. And in fact, education is something in which people are thinking about trying to actually get more research and trying to test the charities more thoroughly to see what long-term impact they have. The problem is, of course, it's not as quick as giving a bed net and seeing that children are not getting malaria. It takes several years to see the results of changes in schooling.
Yeah, even though the governments should do something, but still the providing bed nets while waiting for the government to do something, or while trying to encourage the government to do something, but then the children are suffering. So then while doing that, we should also do something about.
Yes, it doesn't exactly. It doesn't have to be either or. It can be both.
Yeah, the way it is the way I see it. Like there is a drowning kid, which is your example from your paper. The drowning kid, and we see it, and we should do something about it. We can easily save the child, so then we should. But what if we see other people just looking at the kid and not doing anything? The fact that other people are not doing anything doesn't mean that we shouldn't also, right? Or maybe there is a person actually who threw the kid into the pond. So he should save the child because he threw it, but he doesn't. So then why shouldn't I? You know, does this
Yes,
give...
exactly. Yes. I think that's right. We should still save the child. Then maybe we can try to do something about the person who threw the child in the pond. So that other people don't do that, and even try to persuade the people who just stood there and didn't do anything that they also could have jumped in and helped the child.
I think this is a appealing way of looking at it, because even if there is because for example a global company, let's say they dig a hole for something and then they just left it there, and because of the rainwater it's filled, and then that's why the child is drowning. Yes, it is the company's fault why the child is drowning, but first save the child, or then focus on that. So that there are priorities, I think. Not that it is not important to try to do something against the policies of the powerful entities in the world. All right. So can we, this is another question, can we be sure that when we donate money to these causes, can we be sure that our money will be used properly? How sure can we be?
I believe that if we donate to the charities that are recommended by the charity evaluators that have been recommended through the effective altruism movement, we can be very confident that the money will be used properly. So I'm talking about the charity that I founded, The Life You Can Save, which recommends about 20 charities, all of which have been carefully screened. And another organization that does very good research is called GiveWell. So you can find them at givewell.org. And The Life You Can Save actually draws on some of their research. So there's a handful of these small organizations that are independent of the charities that are doing research or gathering together research that's done by different organizations. And with those charities, I think we can be very confident that the money is going to the places that we want it to go. Which is not to say, of course, that every penny we give goes to those organizations, because they do have to have some administration. We should recognize that, if you're going to give them money, somebody has to process the money. And also they have to decide how to use it best. They have to employ people to, let's say, stick with the case of the bed nets. They have to employ people to go to countries where malaria exists, to find local, reliable people who will distribute the bed nets and speak to people in their own language about how to use the bed nets and why it's important to use them. All of that involves some expense. So people shouldn't be unrealistic and say, I want every penny that I give to go to the people in need. You need to have some organization to make sure that's the money, that the vast majority of the money does go to the people who need it.
Yeah, which is also money well spent, I guess, right? Because it is
yes, absolutely.
It works.
That's right. Yeah.
All right. And another question is, I am not a billionaire, right? So how much change can I really make? So if I donate some part of my salary, for example, it will be like a drop in the ocean, right? How much change can I even make? That is again another common question.
But I think the drop in the ocean metaphor, although it's often used, is misleading, because what does it matter if the ocean holds one more drop of water or not? As far as I can see, it doesn't matter at all. But the drop of water in this case is a child who doesn't die from malaria, or maybe it's somebody who would have gone blind, but because you've donated to an organization that protects people's eyesight from various causes of blindness, which can be done very cheaply, this person will not go blind. Or maybe it's a person who is blind but has their sight restored by a cataract operation. Or maybe it's a person who is mentored to start a small business, given some training and small seed capital to start a business. And so this person lifts his or her family out of poverty, and even maybe starts to employ other people in the area. So, these maybe seem to be drops in the ocean, because you may say, oh, but the World Bank tells us that there's 750 million people in extreme poverty, and I've just been able to help 2 or 3 of them. But these are real people. These are real lives that you've changed. And I think that's, we should feel good about changing lives. I'm not quite sure whether it's Will McCaskill or one of the effective altruists anyway, came up with this example. So imagine that one day you were walking down the street and a house was on fire, and there was a woman there who said, my child is inside the house. So you kicked down the door, you made your way through the smoke, you picked up the child and you saved the child, gave the child back to the child's mother. You would feel very good about what you'd done that day. You would feel, wow, I was able to save a child's life, and there's a mother who would have been grieving for a dead child. I've done something really important. Well, I think it's just as important, mothers grieve when their children die from malaria, just as they grieve if their children are caught in a house fire. And it's, you may not see the child, you may not carry the child out in your arms to save the child's life, but if you can know through the amount you've given that you've saved a child's life, you should feel good about that, and you should feel that's important. You shouldn't think of that as a drop in the ocean.
Yeah. Also, can we say that, let's assume that there are 100 people in that burning building, right? The building on fire, and I can save only one person. The fact that I cannot save all of them wouldn't be an excuse for me not to save the one that I can save, right?
No, I agree. It would not. But this is a fact about human psychology, the way you suggested here, that people tend to think that way. There have been interesting studies where people are asked how much they would give to save 100 people where there's 100 people trapped, like the case you just mentioned, right? And whatever they say, maybe they say they would give $10,000 to save 100 people. And then they're asked, so there are 1,000 people trapped and you can save 150 of them. How much would you give now? And people tend to give a smaller amount of money, right? They won't say $10,000. They will say, oh, that means, 850 are still going to die. Well, I'll give $1,000 maybe. And that's quite irrational. Obviously, every economist would say this is crazy. You're getting better value for your $10,000 if you save 150 people than if you just save 100. But somehow we focus on the fact that these people we can't save, and we don't think it's as valuable to save the larger number. Yeah,
I think it's like changing the topic actually. So the fact is I can help some people, but then my psychology just focuses on the people that I cannot help. But that's not that's not what we are talking about. We are talking about whom I can help, right? So it's just changing the topic. Maybe it is something like if I save, for example, 150 among 1,000, then it will be unjust for those who I don't help. So then maybe there is one thing people are thinking. But again,
well, why is it unjust, right? If you select the people who or something like that, or you select people who are of the same nationality as you, or ethnicity, or speak the same language, I think that could be arguably unjust. But if you just randomly select people, or you take the people who are closest to where you happen to be, I don't think there's any injustice there.
All right. Okay, so one other question was from my students actually. How can we decide how much we should give? Is there a way of determining this? What's the right amount?
Well, this goes back to the question we discussed before. The right amount is the amount where if you gave more, you'd be sacrificing something of comparable importance to the good that you're doing. But that's an extremely demanding standard. So, rephrasing the question in the way that we discussed, we could say, well, what's the amount that I should give where I can feel good about myself? Thinking about praising myself rather than feeling guilty at not doing more. And I think that's a much more modest amount because the standards of giving are quite low. So if you give significantly more than most people in your situation give, you're contributing to raising the standard, and you can feel okay about that. Maybe you can do even better next year, but you don't have to start at a very demanding level. It's a bit like somebody who takes up jogging, and you ask, well, how fast should I be able to run 5 kilometers? Well, just start running 5 kilometers. That's good. It'll help get you fit. Maybe after you've done it a few times, you'll think you can do it a little bit faster. But you don't have to start off at a high level. In the book, The Life You Can Save, I do at the back have some more concrete suggestions for how much people at various income levels ought to earn. I think those suggestions are ones that are not excessively demanding for anybody, but nevertheless end up at quite a significant amounts of money that would be donated if people would follow those recommendations. So I suggest people look at The Life You Can Save, especially once your Turkish edition is out sometime this month, and they will see the amounts that I'm recommending there. But they're just a guide. Obviously, to mention any particular sum is somewhat arbitrary.
And so I think people, when they ask this question, they want like an algorithmic kind of calculation. So this much, right? You should give this much. And also one question there is, there are some people that I am responsible for, right? So they're my dependents, my family, my children, for example. So yes, I can sacrifice my own luxuries and things like that, and then I can help other people who are in extreme need. But what about my own children? Should I, for example, not send them to expensive schools, right? For example. So how much? So what about that balance there?
Yeah, sure. That's one reason why you can't suggest a specific amount or proportion of income. And even when you ask that question, should I send my children to expensive schools? Well, what are the alternatives? My wife and I didn't send our children to private schools because we live in a city where the free public education is reasonably good. Some people do send their children to private schools in Australia too, but we thought the differences are not very good and not very great, and the amount of money that it would cost, there are better things that can be done with that. But of course, there may be some people in countries or even in some cities where the local schools are very poor, and you feel your children would not learn in those local schools, and even in some countries where the local schools might not really even be safe. So that would be a different situation. And I think we need to make those decisions. And in the case of your one's children, then certainly you think about the future, you think about the impact it will have on what they do with their lives. And to some extent, you can see paying for education as an investment, that maybe they'll do better and they'll be able to return more to the world as well. So that's another way of looking at it. But in many cultures, there's an ethic essentially that everything that you have should go to your children, that you should leave all your money to your children when you die, that you should not, stint on any kind of luxury or toy that they want. I think that's a mistake in several ways. I mean, it's bad, I think, because then you don't give to children who are much more needy and have much less, and your child has everything. But also, I don't even think that it's particularly good for your children to not have to to think that they've got everything more than many other children have, and that they don't really have to work because they've got a large inheritance. I don't think that that's actually doing your children any favors.
All right. And one other thing that is being said is about donating to effective charities or charities in general. Rich people, they are just feeling good about themselves by giving. So then this is, I think, about the intentions, why people give, and people give to feel good about themselves, or they give so that to build a reputation, as a good person or something like that, just for showing off. Do you think so? What do you think about the intentions of doing these, intentions of helping others? Does it matter?
So I think you could distinguish between whether what they're doing is good and whether what they're doing shows that they're a good person. And if somebody is giving only for their reputation, let's say, let's say they will only give where they can have their name on a building or something of that sort, and they won't give otherwise, then even if, let's say, this building was a necessary building and giving the money for it does a lot of good, the motivation is such that you might say, there's nothing particularly good about this person. They're not a bad person, but there's also nothing particularly good about it. Whereas somebody who doesn't care about their reputation but gives because they want to help others, I think is a good person. And even if they feel better when they know they do help others, I still think that's a good person. I don't think I distinguish the doing it for reputation, which may distort your giving to give to certain causes and not others, and feeling good because you know that you've helped people. I think we want, the more human beings that there are who feel good when they help other people and feel bad when they harm other people, and even bad when they fail to help other people who they could have helped. I think the world will be a better place if we have more of those people. So I think that's the kind of people we want to have, and I don't at all mind that people feel good because they're giving.
Yeah. I think people have in mind examples like a CEO, let's say, who harm other people because of, let's say, mining activities and things like that, and then giving to charities, and they are doing some bad, and then they are doing some good, like a balance kind of thing. So that it's easy.
Yes.
Is their guilt.
So this might be just kind of whitewashing the bad things that they're doing, and it might be that the amounts they're giving to charity are relatively trivial compared to the harm that their company under their direction is doing. And in that case, obviously, giving to charity doesn't make up for the harm they're doing. But there might also be people who recognize that they've done things that were not good in the past and now want to make up for that in some way and give very substantially to charities. And that can be a good thing to do. I don't object to that. And in general, I think it's better, even if people did acquire their wealth in ways that did harm, I think it's better that they then think about what to do with that wealth and think that I could do some good with it, than they just think about, I could buy a big yacht and live on that yacht and sail around the Mediterranean in my yacht and look good. That's less worthy.
And in your book, you talk about the importance of giving openly and publicly in order to kind of normalize giving,
Exactly. Yes, that's the right word. Yes, I some people say, because we don't want people to give just for their reputation, they should give anonymously and not talk about the fact that they're giving. But it's been shown that one of the things that leads people to give more is the knowledge that their peers are giving. As you say, that normalizes it. That means that it's something that other people do. If you think that nobody else is giving, then you may well say, well, why should I give? Why should I just be the one who gives? But when you say, well, this is what, this is a responsibility that people with wealth have, then more people will follow suit.
All right. And so now we have a new challenge, right? COVID-19. What are the effects of, so your book, the 10th year anniversary was in 2019, and after the publication of the 10th year anniversary, we had this pandemic. Did it change anything due to your perspective to these issues, this virus?
It didn't really change my perspective to the issues that I talked about in the book, no. But there is an obvious application of the principles of the book to the global pandemic that has not been followed through. And that is that just as I argued that some of our resources should go to helping those who are worst off, so I would argue that vaccines should go where they are most needed, including to people who are worst off. And they should not be distributed only to the wealthier countries, even if the research that did the vaccines took place in those countries and they were paid for by those countries. Still, I think they have a responsibility to help everyone in the world. So I support various organizations, and the World Health Organization has this COVAX program to distribute vaccines to low-income countries. I support all of those initiatives. I think rich nations should be doing much more to share the vaccines with low-income nations. And I would like to see in the long run, I would like to see better ways of rewarding pharmaceutical companies for the drugs and vaccines they produce than the patent process, because currently they're rewarded by getting a patent on their new inventions, and then they can make money on that, but that involves not allowing anyone else to produce it. And often in the poor countries, people can't afford to buy the drugs at the prices being paid in more affluent countries. So we need a different system, and there are some systems that have been suggested. There's something called the Health Impact Fund, which would reward pharmaceutical companies for the impact that their products have on reducing illness and death in the world. That would need some government funding to get that going, but it seems to me it would be a much more desirable way of rewarding corporations for the research effort and the expenses of producing new drugs, if they could then be rewarded by how much impact does your drug have on the world, because then they would have an incentive not to patent it, not to keep these things secret, but to spread them as widely as possible.
Yeah. So this pandemic happened after the 2019 edition of your book, but your book, the first edition was in 2009. So then you have this 10th year anniversary edition. I think there are some significant changes between those two editions, right? So why did you feel the need to have this more revised version of the book?
Well, there were a lot of changes. At a simple level, some of the figures had become out of date. And this is a positive change. In that 10-year period, for example, in the 2009 edition, I quote the figures from the United Nations Children's Fund, UNICEF, about the number of children who die before they reach their 5th birthday. And that figure was almost 10 million each year. By the time the 2019 edition came out 10 years later, that figure was down to 5.3 million. So that's really good. It shows that this is not a hopeless problem. We can make progress. And I wanted to talk in the book about the progress that has been made in reducing poverty, reducing child deaths in that period. But another big change was that this was the 10-year period in which the effective altruism movement went from being a tiny number of people talking about these ideas to becoming pretty much a worldwide movement with quite significant sums passing through it, hundreds of millions of dollars anyway, if not yet billions, passing through the more effective charities. So, and a lot more research being done on which were the more effective charities. So the new edition has much more information about specific charities and examples of particular charities that people can donate to. And I thought that was really important to get that information out there.
And so your book is mostly about global extreme poverty. What other issues are there? So effective altruism is not just about that, and you said this is an application of it. So what other causes are effective altruism that works on?
Well, I've already mentioned reducing animal suffering, and there are quite a number of effective altruists who think that particularly the suffering caused in factory farming is a really good cause to work on, because the numbers of animals are just so vast. We're talking about something like 70 billion animals, so almost 10 times the entire population of the world, being raised and killed for food each year. Most of them in factory farms, most of them leading really miserable lives because they're overcrowded, they're indoors, their interests are not considered except to get them to market and get their products to market. Plus, of course, the livestock industry contributes to climate change. And climate change is another very important issue that effective altruists may work on, because it's going to affect extreme poverty. People who are in extreme poverty will suffer most from it. They'll be least able to move. They're most dependent on rainfall to grow their crops. So it's going to have an effect on extreme poverty. It's going to have an effect on wildlife, on the ecology, and on the habitability of the planet, really, or of large parts of the planet. So that's an important issue. And as I say, one that links with what we eat as well, of course, as with energy sources. And other effective altruists are concerned about the risk of our species becoming extinct, what's called existential risk, threats to the very existence of intelligent life on this planet. And they argue that the loss of intelligent life on this planet would be a bad thing, not just because, let's say, that's the death of 8 billion people now, but also because for thousands and maybe millions of years to come, there could be people who have advanced technology, who know how to provide everybody with what they need for a good life. And this could be lost, at least in this corner of the universe. We don't know, maybe there's intelligent life in some other corner of the universe that would eventually come here. But it may be that for many millions of years, instead of there being lots of beings thriving on our planet and maybe colonizing other nearby planets, there will be nothing, and that would be a loss. So these effective altruists argue that even if the risks are very small of us becoming extinct, it's still worth reducing those risks even further. So anything we can do to bring down the risk of extinction of our species is very much worth doing, provides excellent value. And again, that's something that's a bit psychologically counterintuitive. Probably if you said to people, look, the risk of our species becoming extinct this century is, let's say, 1 in 100,000. I mean, it might be a lot more than that, but let's just say that. But, if you donate to this charity, we could reduce that to 1 in a million. Some people would say, well, 1 in 100,000, 1 in a million, does that really make a difference? But of course it does. It gives you 9 chances out of 10 that we won't become extinct as compared to the other eventuality. So that's become another significant area for effective altruists to think about.
And lastly, so I think you mentioned it was your student who decided to not continue in philosophy and have a job in a bank, I think, that a high-paying job, so that he can donate more, right? It was your
Yes, it was actually a trading company that trades in commodities. So, but anyway, yes, in the finance industry, sure.
So choosing a career can be an important decision, right? And if
absolutely
is an important part of one's life, then it becomes a question that they will also solve based on this. How can I be more effective in my in my contributions to the world? And then you mentioned he chose to do that. But for one, I am glad that you didn't choose that kind of a career, right? And you became a philosopher. And then so then the question is, I think this was much more effective, right, in terms of your contribution to it. So then I think it depends on the person, right? So it's not like there is no advice from effective altruism to people that you should choose a high-paying career so that you can give more to charities. It's, I think, more like about the person. Or so what do you think about the career choice?
I think a lot depends on the person. It depends partly on their abilities, because I have to say, the profession of philosophy has become a lot more competitive now than it was when I went into it. It was not so hard to get a job now. Now, when you advertise a decent job in philosophy at a reasonable university, you're likely to get hundreds of applicants. So if you're going to get one of those jobs, you have to be really very good at it. Secondly, in terms of the character that you have, if you're going to go into the finance industry in order to earn a lot of money, you need skills to earn a lot of money. You also probably need some interest in what you're doing, or you're unlikely to do it well. But even more important, you need the character to maintain your commitment to giving away a large part of your income. Because if you go into this industry and then you're sitting there working with people who are living in luxurious apartments, driving, fashionable cars, eating at expensive restaurants, jet setting around the world and staying in luxury resorts, you might think, oh, why am I giving money away? I could be having this kind of lifestyle. You have to know that you're not the kind of person who will be corrupted in that sense. So my student actually told all his friends that this was why he was going into finance. He made it very public. He said, I'm going into finance to give away at least half of my income. And if I'm not doing that, if you see me buying expensive cars or something like that, you should call me out as a hypocrite. You should tell me that I've got corrupted, and you should tell the world, because that will be an incentive for me to keep doing what I think is right to do.
All right. Okay, we are out of time. So thank you very much again joining us, and thank you very much for this. I think this was very beneficial for the people who, because in Turkey we don't have. So I think your book, the Turkish translation of your book, will be the first book on effective altruism in Turkish. So it is not very well known. So thank you very much.
Good. And I want to thank you for organizing the translation of the book. That's a very important thing to do. And also for facilitating this program so that I can talk to people who are interested in effective altruism in Turkey. I hope that they will get the book. And of course, look at some of these, the websites that I've talked about, The Life You Can Save. On career choice, I should mention 80,000 hours, which gives some advice on career choice. So yeah, there's a lot to do and a lot to learn in this field, and I really hope that it will spread in Turkey as it is in several other countries.
Yeah, and I will put those links for that websites below this video.